All right, so you probably had a notification pop up saying this is recording. Are you sure you want to be here? So you can say yes to that. So yes, let's start by looking in the chat. So we have 2 questions so far. The first is, I'm going into counseling and psychology. What would I need to do as a senior? So if I was to expand this question a little bit, if this person is a senior and is thinking about counseling or psychology, what are some of the things that they should be doing? So we can start there, and I will toss that over to the 3 of y'all to start with some advice.
I can hop in first and y'all help me build this answer. So I'm just looking at the chat in the order that they appear. So I'm thinking about, as a senior, it really depends on what you're planning on doing next. And I know that's a bad answer. It depends. So I'm going to give some really general, broad advice for the couple of different directions that I've seen people go. So if you're thinking about going into graduate school and any part of you thinks that you might want a PhD or to work in research at a higher level than you're able to at the undergraduate degree level, you're going to need to get some research experience, especially because it's really hard to get when you are not tied to a university. It's not impossible, but it's a lot easier to do when you have things like research labs and professors who are already doing research that you can get connected to in your senior year or even a lot earlier than that. It'll help you get prepared for something like a PhD program. If you're thinking more towards the clinical side, start looking into different options in terms of master's degrees, PsyDs, PhDs, and see what type of thing that makes people competitive for it. So look at what kinds of questions they're asking in the application process. It usually asks about things like any clinical experience you have, any research experience you have, and it's easiest usually to get that while you're still in a university setting. Some people don't think they want to go to grad school, and that is totally fine too. So as a senior, I would honestly start trying to focus on getting connected to people in the community or the field you think you want to go into and asking them how they got there and making sure you're using the resources at the university you're currently at, just because I know I took a few years off from before coming back, and it really shocked me how the lack of resources made it a lot harder to make yourself more competitive if you do decide to go back and continue something like graduate school.
Yeah, Melanie, I was going to say that's a really good answer to that question. I think it kind of goes along like there's no right or wrong way to tackle this, but it just depends on how you want to tackle it. So you definitely want to look at like programs that are of interest to you. So specifically for me, I decided to do a master's in counseling psychology at the University of Kentucky because the research that I want to do is about social justice and social inclusion. So definitely think about what it is that you're interested in pursuing and then finding a university that is doing that kind of research. And if you just decide that, again, like you do want to go the research route, you can always just join a university and do research with a professor, but it makes it a lot more easier when it's something that you're passionate about yourself. So there's a lot of like introspection that goes along with it too. Because if you don't have that introspective aspect where you're like, well, what do I want? It almost kind of feels like you're just catering to the people that you're in the university with. So definitely do some reflection on that part. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I can add some thanks for the 2 of you just sharing your points. And I really think that when I was a senior, I think that is really important to try out, like, because at that time I'm not sure what kind of like research that I want to have, I want to conduct in the future, and what kind of research interesting I have. But I contact a lot of professors in the university that I was in. So I think it's really important to try out and verifying what kind of things that you are passionate about, because when you want to pursue a PhD or a master's, I'm not, but not a PsyD, but especially for the PhD, you need to have a great fit with the professor that you had when you are like to initiate a application. So I think it's really important to reach out like the resource that you have and try to like use that experience to find out what kind of research interesting you have. And that is very terrifying at the very beginning, but when you get in there, you will gain a lot of insight out of who you are and what you're gonna do.
Building on that and kind of morphing into the next question, the only other thing I wanted to note is sometimes as a senior, it can be really like overwhelming. Kind of, I'm aware we are near the end of the fall semester of someone's senior year potentially. And so I just always like to remind people to focus on transferable skills. And what I mean by transferable skills is even if, let's say you think you want to get some research experience and you really want to study a specific thing, but there's no one available in your world that is studying that thing. Focus on the skill of how you would need to do that research in another space, because it's going to help you be more competitive, whatever that next level is that you decide to go to. I see the next question in here about the difference between a PsyD and a PhD, and then kind of what is counseling psychology. I know we're using a lot of very jargony words of counseling, clinical, master's, PhD, PsyD. So before I take a stab at it, does someone else want to explain some of those things, and then I can help fill that out?
Yeah, let me briefly show a slide that I think will be helpful. So first, when we talk about, can you all see this? Can you give me a nod if this looks okay? Cool. All right. So PhD, it's a scientist practitioner model. You're learning to do research and how to be a clinical practitioner. You're learning the research and the teaching potentially and the clinical practice. It's a lot harder to get into PhD programs. A given program tends to accept 8% of people who apply. But the cool thing is that if you do get in, chances are you will get full funding, which is you spend 20 hours of your week every week doing something for the university or the program, and then they waive your tuition entirely. They give you a small monthly stipend, and sometimes health insurance is included with that. It's a lot. You go into less debt if you get a PhD because of that funding. It tends to be more personalized training, smaller cohorts in about 5 to 7 years. Whereas with the PsyD, it's a practitioner scholar degree where it's only 10% focused on research and 90% on clinical practice. And so it's about, you can learn to consume research, but not conduct it generally. The cool thing is it's a lot easier to get into PsyD programs, but very few PsyD students get funding. And so that can mean triple digit debt, a median debt of $180,000 US dollars. Larger class sizes are typical for some, but not all PsyD programs. And they tend to be a tad shorter, 4 to 5 years. So that's PhD versus PsyD. When it comes to clinical psych versus counseling psych, the big thing you want to know is that there are two specialties in psychology, just like social psych or industrial organizational psych are specialties in psychology. And so with this, we do a lot of the same stuff. We have different historical roots, but we can do all these things: research, teach, talk therapy, psychological assessment, clinical supervision, consultation. Both clinical and counseling psych can do those things. We get licensed as psychologists. We're both trained in mainline therapies, can see a variety of clients in a variety of settings, such as these. And all these slides are from the 2021 thing. So, you can watch the 2021 Q&A if you want. But people always want to know, well, are there some on average differences between counseling and clinical psych? These are some of them. So I'll mute myself, and students, if you want to kind of speak to some of your thoughts about PhD versus PsyD and clinical psych versus counseling psych, you can speak, and I'll leave this slide up for reference for the time being.
I'll go a little bit just to flesh out some of it that I've kind of accidentally learned along the way. I know I had a really big soul search when I was deciding to apply to clinical versus counseling. I ended up applying to both and then waiting to see what offers I got and seeing where I felt more of a fit when I was able to do things like interview and talk to other students. But some things I've learned along the way is that there tend to be certain subjects or areas of research that for whatever reason live in clinical or in counseling. So for example, I started off being really interested in couples research, and for whatever reason, almost all couples research is in clinical psychology and not counseling. There's some history behind that that's probably a little boring for me to go into, but if you're really interested in a specific area of research, I'd suggest seeing where that lives typically, if it's more in clinical or more in counseling. The other big differentiator that I've always understood it as, and I'm really curious what Cynthia and Wenji think about this as well, is clinical psychology tends to deal with more of the extremes of human experience. So things like more serious mental illness, more medical model-based approaches for some of this stuff. And counseling psychology tends to live more in the everyday experiences, depression, anxiety, adjustment, trauma, that sort of thing. Of course, there's overlap and we're trained to do all of it. All of us are, but that's what it tends to end up doing. Counseling psychology also tends to have a heavier focus on stuff like social justice. So if that is something that's really important to you, the way it's important to students in our program, it tends to hang out more in counseling psychology. Not all the time, but on the whole.
And I want to add that there are differences in the focus on research. If you open the profile of the professor in counseling psychology, compare with the professor in clinical psychology, you can see that a lot of clinical psychology professors focus on like the disease, mental illness like schizophrenia and BPD, about like something like that. It's like a severe mental illness, and you can find out they're trying to find a mechanism and how to do some medical treat about to deal with that situation. However, like let this slide that Dr. Hammer shared before, and in the counseling psychology, professors more like try to focus on the more like not so severe mental illness, and also like you can find out which kind of like research interesting you like and to choose which kind of a professor could be a good fit for you.
We got plenty of questions to go through, and so I'm looking at questions in time, so I'll try and steer us as best we can. So rolling on to the next, what is the process of getting a master's in counseling psych here at UK looks like in terms of applying? Yeah, so the PhD doctoral degree, the December 1st is the deadline. For the master's program, it's February 1st. And so our apply webpage has information on the stuff you need to submit in order to apply. So if you go to counseling psych at University of Kentucky, you can go to our apply webpage and learn about all the things and the requirements that are associated with that. The next person, I'm thinking of clinical psychology, but does counseling psych relate to it in some way? I think we kind of touched on that their watchword is they're more similar than different, but there are some of those on average differences. And if you're curious to learn more about that, my website has a whole page dedicated to comparing clinical psych to counseling psych. So drjosephhammer.com has a resource about that in the psych grad school section. What are career options for individuals with these degrees? Students, do you want to name some of the things that you're aware that counseling psych and clinical psych folks do with their degrees?
So I know some of the big things, especially a lot of people looking into doing PsyDs, is opening up their own practice. That's so that they can provide therapy to people in the community. I'm interested more so in becoming a professor myself, where I conduct research and have my own little lab. So.
For me, part of what I really like about the PhD is the flexibility. It's part of what makes it so competitive to get in and so hard to get through. But on the other end, I will be pretty well qualified to practice clinically, just about anything I want to practice. I'll be qualified to teach. So for me, I've learned along the way that I really love teaching. I really love teaching in the university platform. So I'll be qualified to do that. And I already do some of it in some of my assistantships, which is really cool. I'm also qualified to do research, right? So like what Dr. Hammer does, he has the degree that I am currently trying to get. There's different flavors of doing research. There are big research schools like the University of Kentucky that you can do research at. And there's also smaller schools that might have more of a focus on teaching, but balance it with research. So I can also do a little bit of all of it. Most of the psychologists I know who aren't in academia, so they don't teach at a university like this, have their fingers in several different things. Sometimes they work in nonprofits, sometimes they work in think tanks, sometimes they run their own community mental health agencies. It's really flexible, which is awesome and also kind of overwhelming simultaneously.
And for me, I think I'm quite similar with the Melanie. Like also, I want to focus on like the main like aim of to pursue a PhD program in counseling psychology. I want to do academia in the future. However, like I noticed that when I did like when I have a 2 master degree in Canada in University of Toronto in counseling psychology, and also have a master degree in clinical psychology in China. And when I did the practicum or the internship in the counseling psychology, I found that there are like those two, like I think the most specialty of the counseling psychology and clinical psychology is the practitioner and scientific training model that allow us to do some clinical work and also and also focus on in research. So I think there's two kind of things can mutually help each other. Like when a lot of like my research idea come from the actual like practicing in the real world, and also the research could help me to conduct more efficient and effective therapy in the counseling room. So I think there are mutually, but I think the specialty of the counseling psychology and clinical psychology is like you can like to both focus on those two domains, and it's really important to like to know that whether you like this style, because it's sometimes it's very stressful, because it's probably you need to do double or at least more than 1 times of the workload when compared with the other PhD.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Next question. If you do a master's program outside of counseling psych, can you do a PhD in counseling psych? Yes, absolutely. Counseling psych PhD programs and PsyD programs, we want to admit talented students who we know are going to be successful grad students. And so you can do a master's program, and as long as you can articulate how your prior coursework, whether it's just bachelor's or bachelor plus master's, even if it's master's in an area unrelated to psychology, you learn valuable things there. If you can articulate how these things have set you up to be a great future counseling psych doc student, that's great. So not at all a barrier. For folks who want to go into a clinical psych PhD program, typically people will do their bachelor's and then they might do post-bac positions to help prepare them to try and be competitive applicants for clinical psych PhDs. So counseling psych and clinical psych's norms are a little bit different around that. What are the levels of degrees for counseling psych and what careers are possible with those? Yeah, so great question. So you have a master's degree, typically 2 years, sometimes 3 years, it depends. And then you have a PhD or a PsyD, which tend to be more 5 to 7 years, a doctoral level degree. You want to think about it like the PhD and the PsyD, that doctoral level lets you do all the things as the students were talking about. Lots of flexibility, a little bit more prestige and credibility in the wider professional community. You can charge higher rates for your services. You can do research and teach. You can do psychological assessment independently. If that stuff is less appealing to you and you just want to provide talk therapy, then a 3-year counseling psych master's degree, if you're in a non-KCREP only state, that can help set you up to then go to the counseling board in that state and say, hey, can I become a licensed counselor? Like you might have heard the term LPCC, licensed professional clinical counselor, or some version of that. And so if you just want to do talk therapy, getting a terminal master's degree, whether it's a 3-year counseling psych degree or a CACREP accredited counseling degree, or a 2-year marriage and family therapy degree, or a licensed clinical social work degree, those are other options. It gets really complicated at the master's level, but that's a brief kind of thinking about doctoral level versus master's level. And then there was a question in a second about how do I know what graduate schools to look at? So students, what do you think?
Well, I am reminded listening to Dr. Hammer list some of the options of how I felt when I was an undergrad. And I felt like I was drinking out of a fire hose. I felt like there was so much information coming at me and so many acronyms and so many options to get to really similar career paths that I felt really overwhelmed and I just could not retain all of it. So I just want to pause and say, if that is you in the room, I see some questions about, I really want to specialize in talk therapy. This is a lot of acronyms. Let me first say you are not alone. I very much felt that way. I still feel that way. So as you're deciding to go through grad school and where to even start, this is a shameless plug for Dr. Hammer's website, but he actually has a really cool tool where you can answer a bunch of really detailed questions about what you want to do professionally. And it gives you some suggestions on where to start to weed through some of that alphabet soup of ABA and LLPC and psychologist versus psychiatrist versus PsyD versus PhD, all that stuff. It's a really good tool to start. And then when you start to look for graduate schools, honestly, I usually recommend my mentees, the people I've picked up along the way, start by Googling it and looking at insider guides. So there's a lot of different flavors of those. There's a lot of options. Some of them you pay for, some of them you don't. But really, a good mentor is really invaluable when you are starting to decide what kind of grad school you want to go to and what's going to fit for you. I've seen a lot of people who end up in bad fit programs because they didn't know that there was something else out there that fit better. So do your homework, shift through all of those acronyms and all of the options, and then don't reinvent the wheel. There are insider guides to these types of things that'll help you walk through it. So you can do it by yourself, but you don't have to. So I don't recommend it. So all of that to say, I would start with something like a self-service tool on Dr. Hammer's website. You'll have to remind me what it's called exactly, Dr. Hammer, but I refer to it all the time, and then work backwards from there.
Yeah, I posted a link to it in the chat. It's the mental health professions career test. It gives you interest scores on 21 different mental health occupations to give you a sense of direction on what might be a good fit. But what were you going to add?
Yeah, and I want to add that, like, I do believe that mentorship is very vital in graduate school, especially. And I think the fit of with no matter you want to get a PhD or a master, like you need to get your hand dirty in research and know a lot of things that are going on in that department. And I think Dr. Hammer's website have a great sharing docs, like the list of the every professors in APA program that, and about which kind of research focus they had, could be very helpful for you to find out or narrow down what kind of program you think that is a good fit with you. So I think then you could use that list to help you to find out and think over about where to go, and that could help you to save a lot of time. I was struggling. I didn't know that resource at the very beginning, so I Googled I used the QS News as a ranking in counseling psychology and clinical psychology, and I researched and searched it one by one, and it's really time consuming. And I think that there are some resources that you could use to save your time.
And I was just thinking, I don't know if we came full circle, like how do I know what graduate schools to look at? Like, can we address, maybe Sin, you can speak to this about like how could you tell like this would be a good, like a quality or a good experience program, like positive signs or warning signs in terms of like that people should look for?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm interpreting that question differently than how you guys are answering it. So it's like, how do I know if a grad school is a good fit for me? And I thought about like what I'm bringing to the table. So again, like if it's the research that I'm looking at, and I feel like I can't know if a grad school is a good fit for me if I don't know what it is that I want to contribute or what I want to bring to the table, if that makes sense. So, and I agree with everything that everyone said, like definitely like looking into research, like Google was also my friend during that process. But also just like so for me, I took 6 years off before I decided from between undergrad and then going to grad school, just to get experience because I wasn't ready for grad school because I didn't know why I wanted to go to grad school. I knew that I would go to grad school, but I didn't have a want behind the why or a why behind the want. So it's like when I found my why, it was really easy to apply and to go. And so that was my perspective of that question.
And I do want to share that there is one tips that you can find out what kind of like the graduate school or that program looks like is to like directly contact the students, perspective like current students in that program. And that really helps because some are very famous and fancy and fantastic university have some program, but it may not like a great fit for you, or it's not have a great quality. I'm not saying like there probably there are some like there are some information gap like between that research, or even though that there are really top university, they may not focus on or put a lot of emphasis on this program. So it's really important to double check with the current students. And I really recommend to directly and ask them like about like what kind of like the quality or the training or the any things and how they think about that training. And I think that could help you to gain some insight about how to look at that program.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of that, because I know I saw in someone's question or someone's comment, they said that they didn't want to do research. And it's like, well, that would be you deciding like, okay, so I don't want to go into a program where I would be expected to do a lot of research to fulfill XYZ. Like Melanie said, there's like almost multiple routes to get to the same spot. So you would just not take a route that would require you to do the research with that. So just like asking yourself questions like that to get you to find what program would be good. And again, like reaching out to the people that are already in that program, and even sometimes the professors and a lot of the universities on their website, if you do find a university you want to apply to, will tell you what is expected. They'll also like provide courses that they expect you to like, oh, this is what your master's looks like, or this is what the courses for the PhD programs look like. So look into those courses and what's expected of the students on the websites as well.
And I just really, all of that. And I want to super underline the piece of reach out to real people, reach out to the current grad students. I wish I would have done that more earlier in my career of getting here. But I can only speak for myself and the people that I know in this program, but all of the grad students I know are usually pretty willing to talk about the experience, even with a cold turkey email, just like, hi, my name is Melanie Miller and you don't know me, but I'm thinking about applying to your program. We tend to respond to those. I know I do. And I learned a lot doing that because it's not just getting into grad school, it's getting out of grad school. It is both parts of that process that you really want an insider opinion on, which is usually the students.
Yeah, thank you all. Moving right along, I do not want to do research. Will I have to get my master's in counseling so I can be a therapist? No, for masters, so for counseling, for social work, for marriage and family therapy, you won't have to do research. And so if you don't want to do research and you're cool with a master's degree and you just want to go on and do talk therapy in the community, yeah, you probably get like a counseling 3-year degree from a KCREP accredited program. What would be considered clinical experience and where are the best places to look for that? Clinical experience is it's anything where you have a supervisor who has some authority overview and who can write a letter of recommendation for you later if you do good work there. And it's a clinical experiences where you're using your listening skills and your helping skills to help somebody out. So it doesn't have to be like close to a therapy relationship, but it's some sort of thing where you had to use your listening skills, your empathy skills, your helping skills, perhaps your social justice or activism skills to help out a person or group or community. And so you're developing and being able to talk about the transferable skills, because we're looking for raw ingredients in people. We want to bring people in who are going to be good talk therapists. And if it's a PhD degree, good researchers too. But when it comes to clinical experiences, like, are you empathetic? Are you culturally sensitive? Do you have some interpersonal skills? Can you read the room? Like, those are the core ingredients of a good future counselor, a good future talk therapist. Could you briefly explain all the differences between counseling psych and clinical psych? I think we touched on that. And what would a good application look like for a PsyD program? I am, in the interest of time, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Nayeon Cindy Kim, if you want to get ready in a second to ask your verbal question, as I know you wanted to ask a verbal question and you're in the list, I'll get you off mute in just a second. But I'm going to paste into the chat a resource that I think you'll find helpful for thinking about clinical experiences. Students, anything to add? And like if we have just a minute, like anything to add around this question.
Ask your advisors, whoever your assigned advisor is in the psych department, they're going to have the best pulse of what types of labs or internship experiences there are. Like, I'm just thinking about, in my world right now, we're interviewing for interns to act as mock clients in a master's level course, even though the undergrads aren't taking that course. So that's really cool clinical experience, because, but ask your advisors at wherever you are. They're going to be your best resource for things connected to the university.
Okay, so let me see here. So Nayeon, I'm going to find your name in the list here. I've got it. So I'm going to click ask to unmute. So hopefully you should be able to unmute now and pose your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thank you so much for hosting this session. I am already learning so much from it, and I'm really grateful to get this information directly from you guys. And Dr. Hammer, you got my name absolutely correct. So I'm very grateful for that too. So I had two questions, and the first one was, so if any of you are international students, I was wondering what are some of the challenges that you face in your PhD journey, such as adjusting to Kentucky or getting a clinical or counseling internship. And then my second question was, so I'm really excited to apply to the University of Kentucky for the PhD in counseling psychology program. And I'm wondering what initially made you choose the program or the university in general, and what are some of your favorite aspects about the university now?
So I think it's my privilege to answer the first question, because I come from China, and I'm an international student, and I have a 1 year that I spent in Toronto and to finish my master program, but I still felt like the transition could be very challenging at the very beginning, because you are facing a very different community compared with your ancient country. I assume that you come from Korea, right? So yeah, I think that is very interesting too. I think for me, the language, especially in the counseling room, could be the best, the biggest challenge at the very beginning, because I know how to use the Mandarin to do the counseling, but I still struggling in notes and in how to conduct a counseling session in English at the very beginning. And also, but that is not unsolvable. You can to sincerely to share with your clients about everything that you have, and sincerely be authentic about your language skill and they will understand you. And I think that is a very like positive feedback from the clients that you can communicate with them, even though that is the second language of you. And also I think the community, like the lifestyle in the American, like you need to like try to got a driver license, and unless you can get anywhere by yourself, and also a lot of a lifestyle about like you need to cook by yourself, and it's not like the like. So there are a lot of like I don't want to compare with that of a lot of details, but I do think that you can make a great like survey about like the what kind of life for PhD in American, or there's something like that could get some insight about like what kind of a challenge that you will have. And I'm more than, if you have any question, I'm more than happy for every like international students to share like my experience, then you can just contact me, or we can talk about it in more detail. Yeah. And for the next, the second question, I think Melia and Cindy could share more.
So what I heard of the second question, please correct me here, is why did we pick this program in particular? Why did we pick UK? Is that right? Did I remember that correctly? Yeah, okay. Correct me. It will not hurt me. I know for me, to be really honest with you, I only applied to PhD programs in large part because I knew I wanted a PhD, other than some of the other options. I knew it was going to be the best fit for me and my career. The reason I ended up applying to UK is mentorship fit. So Dr. Hammer is also my mentor. I would not be at the University of Kentucky if Dr. Hammer was not at the University of Kentucky, to be honest with you. I picked mentorship over location. And I also only applied to things that are APA accredited PhD programs. I only applied to specific programs that I knew would meet my other needs. And then when I got all my eggs in the basket and I saw what my actual offers were and what opportunities I had to weigh things like research fit, mentorship fit, clinical experiences that I might be able to apply to. So at UK, I liked that there's a pretty good range of what type of clinical populations you can work with in the PhD program, that sort of stuff. But most of the people I know tended to pick the program based on mentorship. And there are some people who are also geographically locked in this area for various reasons. Why did y'all pick UK? I'm genuinely curious.
So I picked the University of Kentucky. Well, I'm not in the PhD program just because I wanted to get a master's degree, because I wanted to get research experience, because I was very much so interested in the research side of academia. So that was why I chose the University of Kentucky, because the master's program they offered provided experience in research, and also the research that they were interested in conducting was about social justice, social inclusion. And that's something that I want to be a part of, is like working with marginalized identities and making a more cohesive, well-rounded picture of what our society looks like by getting the stories and narratives of people that have been previously marginalized from this academic space. So that was my reason behind it.
For me, I applied for counseling psychology or clinical psychology for 2 years. And first year, I used the strategy of application. Could be like I search, like I said, like search the every like top university, whether they have an ABA accredited program in counseling psychology or and clinical psychology, and find out like each faculty, like whether that like the research interested are good fit for me, and then contact them and see whether there is a like opportunity to apply for their students in that year. However, like that is like I searched at in the like the list of the ranking of the university at the very beginning. And in the second years, I think that is like the things that I think I'm really proud of myself is I know that I knew at that time that I knew what kind of research that I want to pursue, and I really want to do more in help seeking, especially for the intentional behavior gap. And in that way, I searched every like contemporary literature about like the professor who did that, and I would contact directly with. So that is why I contact Dr. Hammer. And there are a lot of like, I think you could use a different kind of strategy to find out which kind of a university that you want to get in. And the second one is to really focus on what kind of research interest you have. And that could help you like initially have gain a great match with the professor that you contact with. I think that is why that I also like Melanie, I really like value the mentorship in a very like great priority. So, and that is why I get into the UK.
And I should add too, that when we're talking about research stuff, this is relevant for those who want to get a PhD in clinical or counseling psych. It will not be relevant for folks who want a master's in counseling psych or master's in clinical psych or in counseling or in social work or whatever. And this talk of mentorship tends to be a doctoral, especially a PhD centric thing, because if you're in a master's program, you will have some faculty advising time, but it's not that close personal mentoring in the relationship in a way that a doctoral, that you would get in a doctoral like PhD program in particular. Watching our time, 11 minutes, so we're not going to get through all the questions, but we'll do our darndest to get through as much as we can. And if there was a question that you did not get answered, follow up with me through that contact link on my website, and I'll be happy to direct you to where you can find your answers. Somebody asked, would a master's in counseling yield sufficient credentials for a job as a school counselor? I'm not sure. And so rather than guess, I won't say definitively, I'm not sure. If I were interested in being a general psychologist for children, would this be better found as a counseling psychologist? A greater percentage of clinical psych programs focused on children. So counseling psych faculty and programs tend to focus less on children. We tend to focus more on older adolescents and adults. And so on average, more clinical psych programs would be a good fit for that. How do you recommend we start applying for programs and when? Well in advance, because there's a lot of moving parts. I have a resource on my website. There's some stuff that talks about all the components of what you need, like the letters of rec and the personal statement, and you need to be building experiences on your CV. And the GRE is starting to go away, which is great. And so you may not need to take the GRE, particularly if you're applying for terminal master's programs. The GRE, I think, is on its way out because people are realizing the very real problems and inequities connected to the GRE test. Are internships required for graduate school? It does help to get into, at any level, a master's or a doctorate. You do want to have clinically focused, helping focused internships or externships or part-time jobs or whatever. But yeah, you do need to have beyond course stuff because everybody's taken the core psychology undergraduate courses. You can't stand out. Everybody has A's in those classes. What makes you stand out is your internships and your other extracurricular experiences beyond that. What if I'm a Marshall student and I want to go into psychology? I don't know enough about that to answer definitively. Students, do you have a strong take on that? Okay, looks nice. Yeah, so I'm sorry that I don't have specific information around that. What can you do with just a master's degree? I think we spoke to that, and that you can do talk therapy is what you can do with a master's degree. Can you apply to a PsyD program without a master's degree? Yes, you can. If you had a decently strong undergraduate bachelor's experience, you can apply straight into PsyD programs, and it's okay to get a master's in counseling psych before applying to PsyD programs. But yeah, PsyD programs, if you apply to 3 PsyD programs, then you have a decent application. Statistically, you're likely to get into at least one. What are the benefits of getting a master's from a KCREP certified program? If you want to get licensed as a counselor in a state, you definitely want to get a KCREP accredited program, go to a KCREP accredited counseling program. There are some states that allow you to get a degree, a 3-year degree in counseling psychology and still become a licensed counselor, but that's on a state-by-state basis. There's a lot of confusing stuff. So if you want to be safe, get a KCREP accredited master's counseling program and you'll be good for licensure. What is the typical length of a counseling psych program? Master's, it's 2 years if it's like a doctoral prep 48 credit hour program, or 3 years with that 3rd year being an internship if it's designed to help people in non-KCREP only states be able to become a licensed counselor. And with a counseling psych, like a doctorate, like a PhD or PsyD, that's about 5 to 7 years. That's the length of time to do that. And if you already have a master's in counseling psych, that will tend to save you, because you're not going to have perfect efficiency with transferring credits from a master's from one counseling psych program at one institution to a PhD or PsyD program in a different institution. You might expect anywhere between 1 semester's worth of credits to get through to a 1.5 years of semesters worth of credits to get through. So like on average, you can save about a year, but there's going to be some inefficiency because they're different programs, they do it different ways. And so there won't be as much like smooth transition of credits. I'm looking into online marriage and family therapy masters and then counseling psych PhD at Indiana because they're Kinsey Institute. What exactly is a PhD minor? I have no idea what a PhD minor is. And program funding, you should ask the program coordinator of that program or the programs you're thinking about, and also the current students to see, is there funding available? Because it might be just scholarships common to the college or the wider university, but those may be for a very small percentage of people. Students, I don't know if any of you have any additional takes on the, does anybody know what a PhD minor is? I've never heard of that before. Is that something the 3 of you have heard of?
I've only heard of it in a medical context because there's a difference between an MD and a PhD. So sometimes people can get MDs and a PhD at the same time, kind of through a loophole type of thing. But you would really need to reach out to that particular university because there isn't like a flat standard way of what that means. They kind of get to make it up depending on each of their universities and what their standards are.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Harder to get into grad school if you take a gap year. They won't hold it against you. A gap year is good if you're productive with it. If you stream Netflix the whole time, and that's most of what you do, they won't consider that productive. So if you use that to improve your CV, your resume, yeah, it's great, but nobody docks points for people taking a gap year. Should I take time off to do research before applying to graduate programs? If you want to get into a PhD and you don't have enough research experience, you do need to get more research experience. You can do that through a post-bac positions in certain psychology departments with certain professors who are hiring post-bacs, paid or volunteer basis. Or you might be able to get do a master's first, especially a doctoral prep master's program like ours, where you can have additional scaffolded research experience. But yeah, you can't get into a PhD program in either counseling or clinical if you have very little research exposure in a bachelor's degree. How does going to online for master's affect PhD acceptance? We will be less certain of the quality if it's an online master's. And so we would need to be reassured that that there was strong quality to that, because the thing is, being in person helps add a layer of quality control. We get to interact interpersonally with people, and generally the strength of the therapy training that you can do is it's easier in person to do some of that skills practice. And so an online degree may have some stigma attached to it for certain professors, that the onus on you might be stronger, that you got to prove why it's just as rigorous as like a brick and mortar degree was. How long is the recommended time off between undergrad and grad school? Doesn't matter. You take the time that you need to become a strong applicant and be in a good, healthy pace mentally to be able to dive into a PhD. What experience should we be looking to get other than research? I talk about that in like what the ideal graduate doctoral applicant looks like. That's in the link there in the chat. Can you open a private practice with just a master's degree? Yes, if you go and get licensed at the master's level, you can. Do you recommend applying to programs outside of the US? I don't know. I don't know. Wenshi, do you have any insight on this that you wanted to add? The question is, do you recommend applying to programs outside of the US? Because I think it depends on a lot of things.
I also like a little bit, I'm not quite sure about that, but I do know that there are two different kind of like I just compare when I applied for the counseling psychology in PhD like level, I compared the training program in the in the UK, not in the University of Kentucky. It's the United Kingdom, and compared with the UK and US, and I find there are like great differences between the training models. And I think if you like in the UK, as far as I know, like the emphasis of great like focus on the research rather than practitioner or practicing something like that. So if you want to apply for a UK for counseling psychology, or it's mainly I if my memory is correct, the mainly focus on the research rather than the two, like you have two tracks on both on the scientific and practicing. So I think that it's really important to know more, like to make a research or to do something about like to gathering the information about that, like in different country, because that is not like we are not in the same system like a APA credit. So yeah, so even though that is have the same name, they probably have the same course, they probably have a different kind of content that they want you to learn. So it's really important to check it out before you make your mind. And I think that's a great question, because they do have some differences between each other.
All right. Well, I think that we got through them all. So amazing. Look at us. So thank you all for attending. If you're looking for a good master's in counseling psych or PhD in counseling psych program, please make sure to check out University of Kentucky to see if we might be a good fit. Thank you all for attending. I posted some links in the chat for follow-up resources. My website has a lot. Thank you, panelists, for helping us out with this and for sharing your wisdom, and hope to see some of your applications in the future. Bye, y'all.